Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Hello, everyone. Yes, again, it is Friday, and that means FOMO Friday. We love to dispense of your fear of missing out because we know that you're not listening to propaganda media anymore. And so you want to know what's going on around the world, and we're here to make sure you don't have that fear of missing out. And we bring you the stories of the week every single Friday here on the podcast. And and from a series of articles from the Daily Wire comes this first one, and it is a big one. It is President Donald Trump on Thursday signed an executive order dismantling the Department of Education. Yeah, he followed through on a key campaign promise that supporters argue will strengthen parental rights and improve academic outcomes across the country. This is big news, and it is going to be a firestorm here because the unions, the teacher unions, do not want this at all. This is going to go tooth and nail for them. Now, Trump's order directs Education Secretary Linda McMahon to take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return education authority to the states and local communities. That's the way it reads. However, McMahon is also directed to ensure the effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. Okay, so this isn't just everybody turn out the lights type thing. It's still a matter of getting the job done, of the job that needs to be done, but it's also the dismantling of this terrible department. Now, also any program still receiving Department of Education funds will terminate illegal discrimination occurred under the label diversity, equity, and inclusion, or similar terms and programs promoting gender ideology. Everybody knows it's right. This is a quote. The Democrats know it's right, and this is what Trump said just before signing the order. We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs. And this is a very popular thing to do. But much more importantly, it's a common sense thing to do, and it's going to work. Absolutely, it's going to work. Now, Trump said the United States has two stats that you don't want: the most money spent per pupil, and you're at the bottom of the list. And that's where we are, like it or not, and we've been there for a long time. So we're not educating kids. We're spending the most per pupil in the world. It's absolutely a train wreck when it comes to our public education. Now, the president said Republican governors want so badly to take their children back and really teach their children individually. Probably the cost will be half, and the education will be maybe many, many times better. Trump added that he wanted to make one little personal statement, that teachers, he said to me, are among the most important people in this country. And we're going to take care of our teachers. And I don't care if they're in the union or not in the union. That doesn't matter, he said. Not a bad statement. He said Thursday's order is about our most cherished group of people, and that's our children. What we want to have our children, what we want to have is our children well educated. We want them to love going to school. So, yeah, this is a great step in the right direction. Not a surprise. Obviously, McMahon was placed into her position as head over the Department of Education, knowing that this was going to happen. And so this couldn't come any too soon. Well, speaking of corruption and bad departments and things, the Biden administration's Department of Homeland Security was set to give nearly $300,000 to an organization that provides legal services to aliens subject to deportation. Now the Trump administration has frozen its funding. This organization is called the Catholic Migration Services, or CMS. It's a New York-based nonprofit organization and was slated to receive over $293,000 from the Department of Homeland Security to provide naturalization services for immigrants. Now, the grant term began under the Biden administration on November 22nd of last year and was scheduled to continue until September of next year. Well, the organization provides a wealth of services beyond just naturalization, however, and even offers free deportation defense to foreign nationals who have been ordered to be removed. These services are part of the group's effort to advance equity and social justice. These are their words, okay? Advance equity and social justice in a changing and diverse population, unquote. Quote, we provide free legal services, tenant organizing services, and community legal education to low-income New Yorkers, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, national origin, or immigration status. That's what the Catholic Migration Services says about itself. And they say this before specifying that it provides deportation defense services to foreign aliens who have a removal order against them. Quote, our immigration unit is comprised of 4 legal teams: removal defense, affirmation, naturalization, and the Pro Set Plus project. Now, the organization says that the federal funding has been frozen, saying that, quote, CMS previously shared federal funding with other nonprofits to help lawful permanent residents become citizens. However, the Department of Homeland Security has recently frozen this program. This is what the organization told the Daily Wire. And they said, in addition to offering various civil legal services in low-income New Yorkers to low-income New Yorkers, CMS also assists immigrants who have valid legal claims in removal proceedings. Now, the freeze is a part of a wider effort from the Trump administration to halt funding to nonprofits that encourage mass immigration into the United States, including religiously affiliated refugee settlement agencies. Catholic Migration Services states on its website that the organization offers deportation defense, before adding that its offerings are intended to help immigrants in deportation removal proceedings represent themselves in immigration courts and provide assistance with applications for asylum, employment authorization, immigration court motions, and other items. So the Pro Se Plus project is a joint effort of Catholic Migration Services and 2 other organizations. Similarly states that it provides deportation defense to aliens who are subject to removal. Quote, we help people avoid exploitation in absentia removal orders, missing deadlines, and notarial fraud. Now, this is it reads right off of their website. It's referring to removal orders that are issued by immigration judges when a non-citizen fails to appear for an immigration hearing. CMS has also come out against the Trump administration's effort to enforce federal immigration law. Shocker, right? Accusing the president of launching an assault on the immigrant community. Okay. Through his threats of mass deportation and xenophobia rhetoric that has instilled deep fear in immigrant communities. Okay, so you can see where they're coming from. They're just spouting out lies, and they're just mad because, you know what? Their funding's drying up. The funding from the taxpayers. The group is far from the only far left organization that has received DHS funding, despite advocating for illegal aliens. However, the Biden administration also gave $1.2 million to the Coalition for Human Immigration Rights, which is just a radical organization that works to dismantle the U.S. immigration and enforcement system. The organization was part of a broader coalition of nonprofits that sought to naturalize citizens and mobilize them to as voters to sway the outcome of national, state, and local elections. So again, the part of what has been going on here is that the borders were opened because the idea from liberal Democrats was that if we let anybody and everybody into the country, then these people are going to vote for us in the long run. So we are going to be able to sway the election with with people from other countries, and so obviously, it didn't work in this last election, and now Trump is saying, okay, we've got to get all of these illegal aliens out of the country. But what's been happening? Well, our taxpayer dollars have been going to fund the legal fights for these people. So basically, you have the government fighting against itself. You have part of the government that's saying, hey, you have to come, if you want to come into our country, you have to do it legally. And then another part of itself is saying, hey, you're here illegally? Great, let's give you some funds so you can, fight to stay here. So it's government hard at work, right? That's basically what this is. But protection. Speaking of protection, here's something that you're definitely not going to see on propaganda media. A group of Christians gathered at Israel's border with Syria in the Golan Heights over the weekend to demand that the European Union, Israel, and the United States protect Christians in Syria. Yeah, didn't see that, did you? Saadi Kahal, who helped organize the gathering, told the Daily Wire that he is concerned about his fellow Armenians and Armenian Christians just across the border. Quote, we've heard stories of Christians in Syria killed by jihadists or caught by jihadists who tried to convert them to Islam by force, he said. One man preferred dying with his faith in Jesus Christ as his savior rather than submitting to Islam. Now, Kahal is part of Israel's Christian Maronite Aramaic community, which believes it descends from Christ's earliest followers. And the World Council on Armenians reported that Johnny Al-Sayah of Al-Karab was shot and killed by a sniper in a town on Syria's coast on March 12th. His fiancée, Rima Haddad, was severely injured and is in critical condition. Eyewitnesses allege the sniper belonged to Syria's government security forces. Quote, the perpetrators must be visibly and swiftly brought to justice to ensure accountability and prevent further violence against Christians, Alawites, and other defenseless civilians, is what the council wrote. In another incident, the council said Elias Michael Assad, who is also a Christian, was found dead last week after being kidnapped and robbed in Homs. His body, is the quote, his body was laid to rest in his home village of Al-Kansah in the valley of the Christians region of Homs Governorate. Now, according to the Greek City Times, some Christians were recently killed, including two Antiochian Greeks, Tony Petrus and his son Fadi were those. And in total, the World Council of Armenians claims at least a dozen unarmed Christians have been killed since the militants aligned with Syria's interim president brutally slaughtered hundreds of Alawite minorities in Syria's coastal areas earlier this month. Al-Shara called for national unity and domestic peace after the attacks and launched a fact-finding committee to hold the attackers responsible. Syrian authorities blamed the executions on unruly militias who came to help the security forces who were attacked by militants aligned with the deposed former Syrian president, Assad. And in addition to the murderers, the World Council of Armenians says Christians have been looted and threatened since the clashes. Quote, some of these jihadists say it clear and loudly to Christians that your turn will come after the Alawites. Kahol, who is the president and founder of the Israel Christian Aramaic Association, said this in a report. Now, Kahol said his group is demanding that Christian and Aramaic communities in Syria be protected from persecution by al-Shara and his aligned militants. Quote, we demand that the United States, European Union, and Israel help our persecuted Christian brothers and sisters across the border from the Islamic Jihad regime. And this is what Kahul said. And we demand that other Christians be free, be in free societies, help liberate Christian communities in Syria and Lebanon from Islamic Arab radicalism. Quote, while here in Israel we enjoy freedom to act, speak, and demonstrate, the Christians on the other side fear for their lives and are threatened to be ethnically cleansed, he said. We will always be a voice to protect our native Aramaic Christians community in the Middle East. Well, so far, Israel, which has a sizable Druze community with many members who serve in the Israeli Defense Forces, vowed to protect the Syrian Druze from any harm and has shipped humanitarian aid to Druze villages. Kahul said he believes there should be federal systems in both Syria and Lebanon that allow Christians and other minorities to have autonomy rather than to be under the rule of strong central governments that will oppose indigenous people such as the Druze and Alawites and Armenians and the Kurds. By fighting to give Christians around the world autonomy, he said, Europe and the United States can help forge a bridge for peace and moderation in a conflict-ridden region. Quote, our native Christian population has been facing persecution, oppression, Islamization, and Arabization, and we ask to liberate the Christians and stop our people's ethnic cleansing immediately, Kahul said. Now, in a previous interview, Kahul said that it is his life's mission to preserve his people's culture while he was in a Bible as English literature class at the University of Nevada. He said that during a class, the professor referred to Aramaic as a dead language, to which he responded that he and his family spoke Aramaic and that it was not dead. And since then, Kahul returned to Israel and has worked to preserve the Aramaic culture and language. And in 2013, he met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a meeting he said later led to a 2014 measure that allowed Christians in Israel to register as Aramean on their identity card instead of Arabs. And so he also, according to him, there are 15,000 Israeli Christians praying in Aramaic in Israel, and the majority of them belong to the Syriac Maronite Church of Antioch. So that's something definitely to pray for. It's something you're not going to hear a lot about because attacks on Christians just aren't reported. But particularly outside of the U.S., you're just not going to see it. But some interesting information here inside the U.S. And again, terrorism is terrorism, right? U.S. Attorney General Pamela Bondi announced on Thursday that 3 individuals have been charged in connection with attacks on Tesla properties across the country. Quote, the days of committing crimes without consequences have ended, Bondi said in a statement. Let this be a warning. If you join this wave of domestic terrorism against Tesla properties, the Department of Justice will put you behind bars. This statement said that all 3 individuals, if convicted, face a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in prison and could end up facing 2 decades behind bars. The statement did not identify those who were arrested, but gave a brief synopsis of each case, and the cases detailed in the statement appeared to match cases announced in recent days and weeks by the Attorney General's office. On the first defendant mentioned, the one defendant, also armed with a suppressed AR-15 rifle, was arrested after throwing approximately 8 Molotov cocktails at a Tesla dealership located in Salem, Oregon. The case appears to be a reference to the Adam Matthew Lansky, who's 41, who was arrested for allegedly throwing Molotov cocktails at a car dealership and allegedly firing multiple firearm rounds into a building and at least one vehicle, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon. On the second defendant, the DOJ said that another was arrested in Loveland, Colorado, after attempting to light Teslas on fire with Molotov cocktails. The defendant was later found in possession of materials used to produce another incendiary weapon, and the case appears to match the Justin Thomas Nelson, who's 42, who the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Colorado says was arrested on one count of malicious destruction of property for a series of incidents at the Tesla dealership in Loveland, Colorado. And on the final defendant mentioned by the DOJ, in Charleston, South Carolina, a third defendant wrote profane messages against President Trump around Tesla charging stations before lighting the charging stations on fire with Molotov cocktails. The case appears to be a match for a case out of the USAO's District of South Carolina against Daniel Clark Pounder. He's 24, who was arrested on criminal charges related to an arson at a North Charleston Tesla charging station. Tesla CEO Elon Musk responded to the arrest with a post on X and just simply said, "The hammer of justice strikes." he does have a way of words at times, doesn't he? Well, speaking of charges and the court type cases, I wanted to bring this to your attention. Now, this is not something that's happened, but there is a real movement that's going on here, and it's really starting to pick up steam, and I think really for good reason. Now, this may be controversial to you, but I want to throw this out here and see what you think. Now, Ben Shapiro has been spearheading what do you want to call this? It's a movement, I guess, that would free Derek Chauvin. And this is what he said. He said, "What if everything you were told about the trial of Derek Chauvin was a lie? Like everyone else in America," he says, "I first saw the tape of Derek Chauvin and George Floyd on May 25th of 2020. What appeared at the time to be 9 minutes of a police officer's knee on Floyd's neck. Given the tape alone, I drew the same conclusions as most Americans. I tweeted that the police officer's behavior was abhorrent. I called for his prosecution. I said that nobody is defending the actions we all witnessed. So it's not as though I was initially a believer of Chauvin's innocence, but over time, new evidence emerged, a lot of new evidence, and I realized I had done something absolutely wrong. I had rushed to judgment as new information was released, the full body camera footage, the complete autopsy findings, the Minneapolis Police Department training materials even. My viewpoint changed, and it changed dramatically. But most Americans, their only opinion on the case was formed in the hours after the original tape broke. And they didn't know about the new evidence, or they didn't care. The legacy media were deeply committed in this and complicit in this, and they didn't cover the details of the autopsy, the details of the complete body camera footage, and the defense presentation at trial. They let the original impression sit in the minds of the American people for years, and they did that for a reason. They had a predetermined narrative of the race-based guilt of Chauvin, and according to the left, of white people everywhere. Taking stock of these larger forces at play helps to make sense of the bias that continues to this day. The George Floyd narrative was set. A racist white police officer murdered a black man in cold blood. Case closed. Evidence to the contrary? Irrelevant. MPD training protocols? Dismissed. Toxicology report ignored. Medical examiner's findings about contributing factors, conspiracy theories. Consider, for example, ESPN's Stephen A. Smith, who last week dismissed my call, he says, to revisit the Chauvin trial by declaring on his show that he doesn't care about the autopsy, effectively admitting he doesn't care about the facts or the truth. This cavalier dismissal of medical evidence perfectly encapsulates how much of America approaches this case. Quote, "See, you're trying to go down the lane I was trying to go down," Smith declared. "I'm not going to let you take me there, which is why I turned down your invitation to appear on your show. We're not getting into all that science and what the doctor said and an autopsy report, even though I just read it to you to some degree. We don't have to go there," unquote. Well, a proper analysis of any case requires examining all the available evidence, not just the parts that confirm pre-existing narratives based on the first available information. The media and the politicians and the prosecutors had no interest in presenting the complete picture. Judging by their reaction to the announcement of this series that he's putting on, they still don't. You're not going to hear it from CNN. You're not going to hear it from MSNBC. You certainly won't hear it from politicians who built their careers on the backs of this case. But you'll hear it from me, because unlike those who rendered judgment and moved on, I believe truth emerges when we're willing to revise our positions in light of new information. On March 4th of this year, he says, I launched a petition called PardonDerek.com, calling on President Trump to exercise his constitutional authority to pardon former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin from his federal convictions in the death of George Floyd. This isn't just about one man, though the unjust conviction of one man should be enough. This is also about restoring the rule of law after a disgraceful period of politically motivated race and identity-obsessed weaponization of the justice system. Since returning to office, President Trump has been taking historical action to dismantle the radical ideological framework infecting our institutions. In just 6 weeks, he has signed nearly 100 executive orders and taken over 400 executive actions, declaring that America will be woke no longer. He's systematically dismantling DEI programs across the federal government. He's targeting what he calls the tyranny of diversity and forced so-called inclusion in our institutions. He has banned men from women's sports, returning education to a merit-based system, and declared there are only two genders in America. But all of this will remain incomplete if we don't address the original sin that kickstarted the entire woke revolution, the match that lit the powder keg of woke insanity and then spread through every American institution like wildfire. President Trump's war on wokeness cannot be considered complete unless he addresses the fundamental injustice that started it all. Pardoning Chauvin is about making a definitive statement that the rule of law matters more than mob justice, that America is finally ready to correct the catastrophic error that sent our country spiraling into years of racial division and leftist cultural supremacy. Of course, I understand that this is politically radioactive. I get it, he says. I understand the entire American left will completely melt down if President Trump were to do this. I get that the media will lose their collective minds. But frankly, I don't care, because justice should matter more than political expediency. And I'm having a hard time disagreeing with him on this. I mean, if you look at the facts, if you look at what we know now, not just what you saw on a video, I mean, he was definitely wrongly convicted. But, I would love to hear what you think on that one. Well, let's go ahead and get to this last one here. And it has to do with Caitlin Collins. I don't know about you, but Caitlin Collins she is so good. I mean, she is, compared to what we had in the White House just for over the last few years, she is awesome. I mean, she's good just standing alone, without even comparison. But we had Jean-Pierre, who was just awful, and then we end up getting the White House press secretary Carolyn Leavitt, and she threw a barb at CNN White House correspondent Caitlin Collins during Monday's press briefing over her question relating to pardons issued by President Joe Biden. The subject came up following President Trump's declaration that he has voided pardons Biden issued during his final days in office that were allegedly signed by an auto pen. We covered that here, and not by Biden himself. But Leavitt said that everyone was finally able to agree that Biden was cognitively impaired. She said, quote, "I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that it to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign." And she said, I digress on that, but the president was raising the point that, did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge? She noted that some Biden officials had expressed concerns over the issue in a report from the New York Post. Quote, "I think it's a question that everybody in this room should be looking into, because certainly that would be perhaps criminal or illegal behavior if staff members were signing the President of the United States autograph without his consent." After a brief exchange between the two, Collins asked if there was going to be evidence that Biden was not aware that his signature was used on the pardons. And this is where it gets really good. Okay? This is what she says. You have to hear it for yourself.
The president was begging the question that I think a lot of journalists in this room should be asking about whether or not the former president of the United States, who I think we can all finally agree was cognitively impaired. I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign. I digress on that. But the president was raising the point that, did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge? And that's not just the president or me raising those questions, Caitlin. According to the New York Post, there are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents. And so I think it's a question that everybody in this room should be looking into, because certainly that would propose perhaps criminal or illegal behavior if staff members were signing the president of the United States autograph without his consent.
Biden is on the record talking about issuing preemptive pardons to these people.
But was he aware of his signature being used on every single pardon? That's a question you should ask the Biden White House.
Is there any evidence on that he wasn't aware of it?
You're a reporter. You should find out.
Isn't that good? I mean, Leavitt fired back with, "You're a reporter. You should find out." I love that. I mean, literally, she's telling them, why are you asking me? Go do your job. Oh, I'm looking for more to come from her. But anyway, I would love to hear from you, what you think. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. And of course, we're now on YouTube as well. And you can find us anywhere that you get your current podcasts. Thank you very much for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.